Hi, I'm the Head of Crops and Agricultural Data at Sainsbury, so we're going to do a bit of a double act today.
Yeah. Brilliant. So what I thought we'd talk about today is kind of from, I guess, the Sainsbury's perspective, but very much, I guess, the industrial view is what we see as kind of the 5 big challenges facing food systems and how we need to change. But before I jump into kind of what we perceive those 5 challenges are, I wanted to start with what the customer view is. So every year we carry out a CRNS survey with our customers. And if you ignore the green boxes for now, the grey boxes sit behind it. That is what, across Sainsbury's customers, what they perceive the greatest issues are. So plastics, right high at the top of the agenda with our customers, which is not a huge surprise, I'm sure, to most people in the room. But also, British sourcing, suppliers being treated fairly, those sit really high on the agenda. But what I wanted to kind of demonstrate this slide is actually, when you look in terms of what future consumers' demands are going to be from the industry, from businesses, from the government, the green boxes is actually where we interviewed younger consumers, so Generation Z. So this is kind of very much who we see as kind of our customers of the future. And for them, there's a slight shift. So plastic packaging, again, number 1. When you look at environmental destruction and pollution, it sits in at number 2 as their greatest concern. And this is very much because these consumers have been raised in a world where climate change is a much more immediate threat for them. So we do perceive that that will just be a higher and higher agenda for those customers. And I also just wanted to make a quick point before I jump into those 5 challenges, is just the importance of the food system approach. So if we take the example of plastics as one being very close to our customers' hearts, is you have to look at it as a whole system, because you can easily jump to the wrong conclusions and potentially create greater issues if you just respond to that kind of very much consumer-driven demand. So as we all know, from a plastics perspective, plastics does serve a really great role in preventing food waste, whether that be to extending the life of a cucumber or protecting products as they make their way through our supply chain. From a deforestation perspective, compared to some of the other sources out there, like non-FSC approved wood, produced paper, packaging, plastics again, isn't contributing to that issue. From the greenhouse gas emissions, depending on how that is produced and transported, it's a bit more of a mixed view, but again, it's not just a clear-cut view that plastics is necessarily a bad thing. However, if you look at it from an environmental pollution perspective, programs like Blue Planet, you can see that plastics is such a visible polluter, and that's one of the reasons they've been so high on the agenda. But again, on the flip reverse of that, not great for ocean life, but when you look at actually water use in the production of plastics, again, quite a cleaner source of less water use in the production of that compared to some other materials. And actually, if the right infrastructure is in place in plastic packaging, it can be fantastic from a circular economy perspective, because you can get so much more from a life cycle perspective. So just, really important that we do approach these things as a full food system. And just to touch on kind of the Sainsbury's value chain, we have 18,000 farmers and growers within our supply chain, so it's an incredibly complex network. So it's very important that when we make these decisions on what we're going to approach as major issues, actually approaching them in a very carefully considered way to make sure it's right for kind of everyone across that entire supply chain, that you're not compromising perhaps something that might be right and more simplistic to approach from one end of that chain, but then maybe alienating your customers so you're not going to see the full benefit of that change. So these are just the 5 biggest challenges. It was actually quite difficult to narrow it down. There are many, but these are kind of the ones, I guess, particularly relevant, I think, potentially from a potential research and collaboration perspective. So the ones we're going to talk through today are climate change, agricultural practices and the need for innovation, nutrition and customer behaviour, which is kind of linked into nutrition, but I think it's really important not to overlook the importance of nudging customers, and packaging is the final piece. So from a climate change perspective, I'm talking to a very informed room, but obviously this is the biggest challenge of our time. It is crucial that we act as soon as possible to make sure that we're doing the right things. And as we all know, the food system is one of the biggest contributors to climate change effects. And it's something that's very much going to be affecting food supply if we don't act soon. And just a point around UK agriculture is actually pretty good when you look at actually our greenhouse gases emissions. It's only responsible for about 10%. The average across the world is more like 20. But actually that's partially because we're not producing much of our food. When you look at it from the imports perspective, we're importing over half our food. So we're actually just transferring other countries' greenhouse gas emissions into the UK. And yeah, my final point I wanted to make about the climate change view is one of the key enablers we see in actually being able to tackle this issue is the importance of data and essentially being able to measure it, and the more we can measure it, the more we can actually work out where our hotspots are. So what's really crucial is actually how do we have the systems in place that enable us to be tracking all of that data for across the value chain, because particularly when I talked about those sort of 18,000 farmers and growers, some of these businesses are incredibly small and don't have access to the sort of technologies that different businesses do. So actually, how do we look at system-based approaches, data collection, and make it as easy as possible to make sure we know the level of issues that we're facing. And then I'm going to hand over to Sarah to talk about agriculture.
Thank you. So, I think when you look ahead to the next 30 years and you think about the amount of increase that we need to do in food production, a lot of industries would say, wow, what an opportunity. But we know that actually we can't carry on and continue to produce food as we have done before. Now, I sit in the Central Agricultural team at Sainsbury's, and you can imagine the whole climate change and the debate that has been going on for sort of in the news over the last 6 months, it's got quite feisty. So heading up the crop team, people look at me and go, God, you're all right, aren't you, compared to your livestock colleagues? But actually, I don't think we are, because I think we have our role to play as well. And I mean, Guy mentioned nitrogen earlier, but that's just the start of it. So if you think about biodiversity, for example, 75% of our crops need pollination, and yet over the last 27 years, we've lost 75% of the insect biomass. So we have got some huge challenges ahead that we need to be working on. So we need to change how we produce food. So to meet that fantastic opportunity, we will need an increase in irrigation water of over 65%. Now, looking out today, when we have still got farmers trying to lift potatoes and haven't yet planted wheat for next spring, you think, God, we might be all right. But you cast your mind back to last summer and we were in a completely different position. And we can't be reliant on the way we have always done things. And we need to actually look systemically, how do we change our practices? Now, I know we've got some farmers in the room and they will be only too well aware of this in terms of the challenges that we have got around water and whether that be too much or too little. Because actually, often, where you have areas of water scarcity, you also have issues with water quality, which then leads to food safety challenges as well. So whether it's too much or too little, we have got a real challenge in our hands and we need to change what we do. We also need a phenomenal increase in the amount of land if we are to continue to farm in the way that we do today. And we don't have that. We are, whether you look at it UK or globally, 75% of the UK is already agricultural land. We can't increase that by 67%, it's just physically not possible. So how are we going to change our agricultural practices to ensure that we become more efficient and we get more out, in effect, from what we put in? So we need to use our resources better. And if we were to continue producing food as we do today, we're going to increase our greenhouse gas emissions by 87%. Now, we're never going to be able to do that and hit the 2 degrees, so that has to change. So I just wanted to bring to life the challenge that we have with a bit of a case study. So you may be aware that, but since 2004, we've been working with the Woodland Trust. Now, this is a fantastic partnership, but it's actually a lot deeper than that. So all of the eggs that you buy in Sainsbury's with the Sainsbury's label on are woodland eggs. And what that means is that actually all of those chickens have got an area to roam outside that is covered with 20% tree cover. Now that's important because chickens are actually native forest animals. So when they're scratching around in the shade of the trees, they're far happier. So it's a win because we're planting more trees. It's a win because we've got happier chickens. We've got better welfare chickens. But also that means that they are producing better quality eggs. So it's actually a win for the farmer as well, because he is having more class 1 production. So therefore, he has got better output for the resources that he's putting in. So this is just one example, and it's probably a little bit simplistic, but actually by working slightly differently and looking slightly more imaginatively at how we produce food, we can make these differences. And having done this and worked on this, we've actually looked at the impact of this on biodiversity, and there'll be a report out later this month around the increase in pollinators and actually the bat population around those farms that have had an increase in woodland on them. So it's better for the farmer, it's better for the environment, and customers are also benefiting from having better quality eggs. So with that, I will hand back to Alexa.
Thanks, Sarah. Fab. And then nutrition. So I've also included the Eat Well Play in my slides, which I feel like is a good thing for today. But broadly, I guess it's a huge challenge on our hands that if you look at, obviously we've got the Eat Well guide here, but on your left, if you look at what actually the British public are currently consuming, so there is a huge need of how are we going to shift consumers over to this bucket, because it's a huge scale change that we need to achieve. And actually, if you look at it from a data perspective, it translates to 78% reduction in red meat and an increase in veg by 54%, which is quite staggering quantities. And I think Anna made a really good point about actually linking that into what we produce in this country and seeing actually what does this mean in terms of actually shifting kind of farmers into more aligned to that Eat Well guide, so they're more self-sustaining. And again, in terms of that win-win dynamic, achieving the Eat Well guide, not only is it a win from a nutrition perspective, but it is also a win from a climate change perspective. So that will help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce land use, reduce water use, and make customers healthy. So it's really within kind of everyone within the food system's benefit that we actually achieve or get as close as possible to that Eat Well guide. So kind of linking into nutrition, I think one of the big challenges is that we sell a lot of that food already. We sell fruit and veg, grains, pulses. We do sell meat, but it's actually how do you nudge customers into that world where that's how they consume. And being a supermarket, we are very much consumer demand driven, but it's actually ensuring that the role we play, we're helping act responsibly to help take customers on that journey towards that Eat Well guide and recognising where we have the ability to do that. So one of the things we talk about a lot from our nutrition team's perspective is nudging, which I'm sure lots of you in the room are familiar with. But as we all know, there's kind of different interventions you can do, and there are a lot of these that we've been experimenting with over the years. So price is obviously one of the key ways of driving change. I think that's really interesting from a policy perspective, the effect that will have. But there are also other types of nudges we can do. So ranging and placement in stores, so bringing healthier options into the eye level, looking at kind of pricing and promotions, healthier swaps at the checkout, online. And yeah, so we're kind of hoping that, we're trying at lots of these and we're trying to find which ones will actually be the most effective. But we're hoping that nudging will be a really great way of kind of gradually taking consumers on that journey, because just taking away choice is not generally the answer. You don't see the behaviour drive that you have. I mean, if you look at, on our shelves for a very long time, we've had kind of your full fat soft drink versus your diet. Just taking away that full fat soft drink is not going to drive the behaviour change you want. So it's really important that we kind of look at these sort of more gentle techniques, because actually all of these techniques do ladder up over time. We do a lot of work at Sainsbury's on reformulation and just actually slight reductions in salt and sugar in kind of key product areas on those big volume lines over time take millions of calories out of the British customers' diets each year. And just, a couple of examples of nudges we've done recently. I don't know if anyone saw the Disney campaign in store this year, but we've been doing a lot of work in actually increasing uptake of fruit and veg. So kind of very much making it fun for kids in terms of eating fruit, but also looking at how we incentivise through a reward base through our net system in terms of fruit and veg, which has been really interesting to see that response from customers. And the final one, which is one I was quite involved in, I think we've got some from the Better Buying Lab here, was some research we did with the UKRI a couple of years ago now, but looking at, in terms of the plant-based diets, how you actually nudge customers towards that. So very much looking at your flexitarian consumer, because I think, as we all know, the kind of old school approach of calling these products meat-free, meat alternative, it's a taste suppressor, it's not very exciting, it feels like you're already making a compromise. So in our cafes, we swapped out the name. I think it was just called meat-free vegetarian breakfast, or vegetarian, and had a look at kind of more tasty names, more flavoursome cues, so field grown, Cumberland spice veggie, and actually it was really staggering to see the increase in sales in that, which is something that we've kind of looked at how we've actually positioned our plant-based ranges. So renamed our vegetarian range into Love Your Veg, called our mushroom-based sausages Shroom Dogs, much more fun. And actually, all of those interventions can be really interesting in terms of driving actually the flexitarian consumer, because the kind of traditional approach of calling these things meat alternatives. You really were only marketing yourselves towards the customers who identified into that group. As we all know, the bigger market is your flexitarians who are just looking to gradually reduce. And then finally, I don't have time. So plastics, as I mentioned right at the start, that is the #1 concern from our customers, driven by kind of all the usual suspects, whether that be Blue Planet, Extinction Rebellion. So yeah, really, something we've seen probably our most contacts from a CSR perspective about over the last couple of years. But look, as the point I wanted to make was we have to be really cautious about making sure we are looking at the whole system view, because there's been a lot of very quick responses from industry on plastics, which is brilliant. We've moved really fast on it. But you have to make sure you're not creating a bigger problem in the long term by looking at alternatives that might not actually be the genuine long-term sustainable solution if you're just looking to kind of respond to kind of what the consumer pressure is. So yeah, it's really crucial that I think, and this is just the Ellen MacArthur kind of circular economy approach, but within plastics it's a much bigger issue than just kind of looking to remove it entirely. It's looking at what different materials we could be looking at infrastructure actually, because that's, the more we see actually infrastructure changes within the plastics, we can look at actually how we can improve the recyclability streams within that. And it is an area that I think is really exciting from a collaborative perspective. We've kind of done a call to action on it, inviting kind of innovative thinkers to come talk to us about what their ideas are, because I think it's a full industry challenge. And yeah, it's quite an exciting one to see kind of where that will lead to. But I think, as I said, plastics does play a really important role at this point in time. So it's making sure that what we do move to isn't actually, from a long-term and a whole system-based approach, creating a bigger problem. And yeah, and then just finally, I think it's really great to be here today and actually just talk about how, exactly, it's looking at these things from a whole system-based approach. That is definitely the best way of working. Cool, thank you so much.